I'm Sarah Woodward, and today we will be talking about the issues behind controlling GMO labeling and cutting through the red tape. This presentation is an unbiased piece meant to inform you of the controversy over GMO labeling. First off, what is a GMO? A GMO is a genetically modified organism from a plant or an animal, created through the gene splicing techniques of biotechnology. They transform plants or animals using transgenic genes not typically found in that species. However, sometimes they use similar genes found in similar species of plants or animals. Oftentimes, however, they use techniques not typical to traditional breeding, such as using agrobacteria or a gene gun to insert the desired gene into the tissue of a plant or animal they desire to change the trait in. However, only a fraction of the United States population fully understand the science behind GMOs and why labeling may or may not be necessary. We will address a few key points about the issues surrounding labeling. We will look at the consumer stance, the state versus federal guidelines, the Argo-Biotech Corporation's stance, the current implementations and propositions, economical issues, how to mediate the situation, and a brief conclusion. Let's begin by looking at the stakeholders in the battle over GMO labeling to determine what essential approaches we as a nation can take. The stakeholders in the labeling battle range from the consumer to the state and federal government to the Federal Food and Drug Administration and the Argo-Biotech corporations, each having a difference of opinion on what should be done over the labeling of GMOs. Many have heard of the term right to know, but what does it mean? It's based on the consumer's want. They want to know what is being put into the foods they consume. In the video Washington Food Fight, the debate over GMO labels, they state that it's a well-known fact that people often study labels on their favorite foods. In a Minnesota law review, Morgan Helms points out the fact that fat-free, sugar-free may contain peanuts, all natural, and an excellent source of fiber. The label spells it all out for the concerned consumer. It is the reason why the issue of labeling of GMOs has become such a hot topic. People want the right to know what they are putting into their bodies, and why, under the 1990 Nutrition Labeling and Education Act, mandatory labeling of informational nutrition came into effect, and by 1995 was on all products. So the question now, should GMOs be added to that list? Currently, state interest over GMO labelings have shown support for labeling of GMOs, with polls regularly showing more than 90% of Americans wanting labeling of genetically engineered foods. And as it stands, there's a coalition of 37 states within our nation that are fighting for some type of mandatory labeling of GMO foods. And in some of these states, Connecticut, Maine, and Vermont, they have successfully enacted bills in the state legislation that mandate GMO labeling. In addition, several labeling laws have gone into effect throughout the world. In Europe, they have labeling GMO foods since 1997 as a part of the novel food regulation. They began by proof-based testing, and if characteristics of GMO DNA fragments could be identified in the final product, the labeling was mandatory. However, this changed in 2004 and is now process-based. Thereby, if at any point in the process GM materials are used, then labeling is mandatory. Some countries such as Benin, Zimbabwe, and Serbia have no labeling of GMOs, however take a seriously different perspective and ban all GM foods imported and cultivated of such materials. So here in the U.S., what is the right approach? As it stands now, the FDA does not require labeling without the showing of an adverse health effect. And while it has the authority over the food for interstate commerce and its labeling, it has yet to proceed beyond non-binding recommendations when it comes to GMOs. The FDA claims that genetic modifications are a continuum of traditional breeding used for centuries to selectively encourage favorable traits. The GMOs are substantially equivalent to their traditional plant breeds. The FDA encourages developers of GE plants to consult with the agency before marketing their products, although the consultation is voluntary. As of March of 2015, the FDA has conducted approximately 150 consultations on GE food products. The majority of these plants are corn, canola, soybean, and cotton, are typically used to make ingredients that are then used in other food products, which, considering the amount of foods that contain these products, is over 70% of the foods we eat today. These findings have important consequences on the broader domain of the issue over GMO labeling. The Argo-Biotech corporations have vested interests in labeling debates as they've been brewing across the country because their livelihoods depend in part on the GE seeds and the products produced using their seeds. They are strictly opposed to the labeling initiatives taking place around the country, backing all campaigns for the opposition of labeling. In addition, these Argo-Biotech corporations have spent an exorbitant amount of money in the sums of millions of dollars in the labeling campaigns around the nation. Most of the contributions efforts have paid off. However, sometimes by a very slim margin. One of these campaigns is the Argo-Biotech Corporation's funding for a no vote was the California Proposition 37, labeling of genetically modified foods, which failed to pass by less than 2% margin. With so many differences of opinion from different stakeholders, we need to look at the details and determine the right course of action. And a survey of 1,000 people taken by the Millman Group shows that there is a strong favor towards wanting some type of mandatory labeling. But should this labeling be done at the state level or above? As it stands now, each state in the coalition over labeling has imposed different requirements. An example, in Vermont, the GMO bill prohibits labeling products produced with genetically engineering as natural, 100% natural, or all natural. In Washington and California, their propositions would require genetically engineered raw agricultural commodities to be labeled conspicuously with the words genetically engineered, possibly produced, or maybe partially produced with genetic engineering. In other words, each individual state sees the labeling of GMOs in a different perspective with different requirements, making it difficult to maintain a working economy that functions as a whole. Best described in the genetically modified food fight, the FDA should step up to the regulatory plate so the states do not cross the constitutional line, by Morgan Helm, is quoted, "Mandatory state GMO labels would encumber purchases and food supplies nationwide, as well as increase the cost from farmers all the way up to the consumers. These burdens on interstate commerce exceed any possible local interest in informing the customers." In addition, the burdens of imposing different labeling laws in multiple states only adds to the impact by requiring different labeling requirements, which in turn would require different packaging to comply with all the state labeling regulations, thereby adding to the economic strains of the individual state labeling and additional cost to corporations throughout labeling methods. So what can be done? A couple options could exist. A complete removal on the subject of GMO labeling. Have the federal government take an active approach versus leaving it to the state level. Or even voluntarily labeling GMOs. But are these realistic options? To propose a complete removal on the subject of labeling of genetically modified foods would not satisfy the American population that is demanding change in the policy over labeling. However, to propose that the federal government take an active approach in the situation at hand could be deemed a positive step in the GMO labeling debacle. Who better to handle the oversight than the Food and Drug Administration? They are the active federal entity that could be deemed responsible for protecting the public health of our people by assuring the safety to our nation's food supply. And although I grant that the FDA is currently conducting consultations on GMO foods when voluntarily requested to, the FDA should be responsible to test every GM product that is being used within the nation's food supply. This proposal does not address every food item in the market. Instead, it addresses every major GM product, such as main ingredients of every food item in the market be required to undergo FDA consultation and safety protocols before allowing these crops to be incorporated into our nation's food supply. However, this proposal would see pushback from major Argo-Biotech corporations due to their user agreement that specifically states that scientists cannot test a seed for any independent research and cannot examine whether the genetic modified crop leads to unintended side effects. However, to mediate the situation and appease the stakeholders of the Argo-Biotech industry, to add stipulations that scientific data collected by the FDA be maintained on a classified basis could ultimately allow the FDA to maintain both an active role in the research and monitoring of GM crops without specific scientific methodology being disclosed to the public. This would mediate both the need for the scientific research on GM products and maintain the continuity of the Argo-Biotech Corporation patented technologies. As of March 15th, the federal government has stepped into the field of GMO labeling with the introduction of H.R. 1599, the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act of 2015. Currently, as the Act stands, it will require the FDA to conduct voluntary testing, and as it is currently doing. It does not currently have a testing procedure enacted within the bill. However, private companies have already taken an active approach and steps to testing in tolerable levels of GM within their products. The non-GMO project has been labeled items as containing GMOs since 2007, based on action thresholds for high-risk input and products. Please see the chart below. It is similar to the standard thresholds of the European Novel Food Regulation. As the current Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act has not established much in-depth regulation regarding how they will manage tolerate of the GM products, and it would be suggested to incorporate the standards of the non-GMO project would be successful been testing since for over 8 years as a nonprofit organization and labeling on a voluntary basis. They have established thresholds, traceability and segregation, inspections, testing, and labs. In addition, they have accounted for all processes that the GM products may come into contact with of the non-GMO products. Please see the type of activities below. So, between the federal government taking an active approach, the FDA, the Argo-Biotech corporations, it is likely that labeling of GM food products could be conducted on a voluntary basis by using the non-GMO product standards and procedures to conduct the research on GM products before use in the food products, and all patented technologies be classified research by the FDA, therefore addressing the issues surrounding the GM products and allowing individual producers the option to label as GMO-free. This option would allow producers and consumers who value non-GM foods to market and buy products based on their interest, without saddling the rest of the market with the cost or the burden of labeling of GMO foods. But are these proposals realistic? Yes, they answer the question of consequence over GMOs and the health risks. They allow the agro-biotech corporations to continue production of GM products and seeds, and it allows for those concerned individuals who want to maintain the right to know what is in the food they eat is safe, knowing the FDA has conducted safety testing on the major GM products. But in addition to testing, it would require the federal government to lead the change in understanding of GMOs and the science behind them. Possibly an ad-based campaign such as Got Milk or your Brain on Drugs campaign that seeks to inform the consumer. The more educated the consumer, the greater likelihood of success in mediating the GMO labeling debacle. So in conclusion, I have addressed different approaches. Remove all labeling of GMOs, have a voluntary labeling such as the Non-GMO Project, which is currently doing, have the FDA test all major GM products for all known safety, allergic, nutritional levels, taste, and quality differences following the non-GMO based thresholds, and having the backing of H.R. 1599 Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act of 2015. In addition, creating a classified pool of research based on GM technology that has specific scientific methodologies used to create the patented technologies. Which option is the best is left to the consumer, the corporation, the federal entity, and the state entity in which the issue of labeling is concurring. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Should you have any questions, please contact me at the email below. My references can be found on the following slide. Thank you for listening.